We're in an FW190 F8. A lot of people think FW190s, BF109, stuff like that, that they don't have trim. They do. It's right there. There's your aileron trim tab. Of course, you guys probably knew you had an elevator trim tab. It's right back there. And then, of course, we've got our rudder trim tab as well. Now, you can see as I'm dialing in right rudder trim, you can see my rudder is actually moving back there. And if I dial it back and reset it, it'll move back. And if I do the same thing with the ailerons, I can sit here and roll the ailerons right, left, and do all that good stuff before I eventually need to recover. Now, with trim at neutral position, we are neither deflecting the ailerons, the rudder, the elevator upwards or downwards. What they're going to do is they're going to weather vane into the flow of air and take the path of least resistance. Now, with the aircraft at a certain speed and with a certain amount of torque on it, there's going to be a bunch of asymmetrical forces being imparted upon it, and if I were to let go of the stick, just like so, we're going to get some sort of a rolling tendency, a drooping of the nose, a climb, a yawing moment. All kinds of weird wonky stuff can happen because the aircraft's not balanced. Now, as opposed to having to hold my aircraft here for the duration of flying by constantly veering my stick off to the right, what I can do is come in here and just dial in some aileron trim to the right. And once I get that notched just about where I want it, feels like 4% is just about right. Next thing I'm going to do is take a look at that little black ball right here. This is called my side slip indicator. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get that as close to center as possible, the center being marked by this little demarcation here. And think of it like a little bubble level. And the rule is you want to step on the ball. So if the ball is off to the right, we need right rudder. So here comes the right rudder now. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 looks good. I'd say 4 is pretty centered up. Now you see when I put in that rudder trim that I'm starting to roll off to the right. So we're going to come out on some of our aileron trim. We're going to cancel out some of the aileron trim. The rolling surface and the yawing surfaces are very symbiotic. You can do a barrel roll in an aircraft without ever touching the sticks simply by using your feet. So if I wanted to jam my feet left, I can get a left roll. If I wanted to jam my feet right, I can get a right roll. And I can get my side slip indication out of whack by simply rolling the stick around and not even using my feet. And that's because those two surfaces are very symbiotic to one another, where one hand washes the other. So as I dial in rudder trim, I'm also going to get a bit of a rolling moment, and that's why I want to get the roll predominantly under control, but it doesn't need to be perfect. Then I want to get that black ball nice and centered up. Then I want to come in through here and fine tune that aileron trim just a little bit. And then I want to take a look at my vertical speed indication if it's available. I want to be in a cruise climb. That's what I like to do 90% of the time when I'm not on somebody's six, when I'm not chasing an enemy across the battlefield or being chased across the battlefield. I'm typically climbing at about 5 meters a second at about 230 knots. So I'm going to go ahead and get the aircraft there and get it nice and stable feeling. I'm going to go ahead and stabilize out my throttle right there at 100%, so that's nice and rock steady, and I'm not getting too hot. I'm not underutilizing my power, and it looks like my nose is dropping down a little bit, so I'm gonna just pick that up 1%. And it looks like we're going a little fast. I think we could climb a bit more aggressively, but 260 knots feels pretty good right about now. So I got a 3% aileron trim, I've got about 1% elevator trim, and it looks like I got about 4% rudder trim. My side slip indication is nice and centered up. I've got a good steady positive rate of climb. My airspeed is pretty constant. I might be decelerating a little bit now, but that nose will drop here shortly. And my wings aren't rolling violently left or right when I let go of the stick. So the plane can fly itself for the most part, and I'm free to take my hands off the controls and start looking around, taking a look at the map, taking a look at the objectives, seeing what's around me, communicating with my friendlies. I can take more time to do the hard parts of combat flying and let the flying kind of take care of itself. And then all I gotta sort of decide is what direction do I want to travel in. And then once I get pointed that way, I can let go of the stick, and I might get a little bit of a roll here or there, but just a touch of the stick right back to where I wanted to be. Once that speed, see, I was a little slow there. Now the nose is dropping, my speed's coming back. And then once I let go of the stick on my new direction, the plane is relatively stable again. Now these FW190 trims that I have here, you may not be able to access them in the air like I can here in this video. That is because I'm in a training test flight mode for War Thunder, and those are ground-locked aileron trim tabs. Same thing with the rudder. The rudder is adjusted on the ground by the ground crew. Now, War Thunder gives us the ability to access those and adjust them through trimmer fixation. And what we do is we come into test flight in a single-player mode. We get in the air, we get the feel of the plane, we get it balanced just the way we like it, and then once we like the trim, we trimmer fixate. And then your aileron trim position's been saved, rudder, elevator trim position's been saved. Now to find that trimmer fixate, all you gotta do is come into full reel controls under aircraft and grab your trimming section. And we're gonna look right here, trimmer fixation. Now, I do not believe this is bound by default, so it doesn't need to be a button you gotta press all the time. It's pretty, it's only in test flights that you're ever really gonna use it. But you may find that this is bound by default, trim aircraft. If you see this is bound, just get rid of it. Just come in here and remove that binding altogether. The reason you don't want to use trim aircraft is it removes your ability to precisely manipulate the trim in a incremental way. Now, trim aircraft, the way it works, like I'm going to set it up just to be a button on my joystick real quick. And show you guys how it works. What it does is it translates your stick and rudder position. So if I pull back on my stick and go hard right aileron roll and give a little bit of left rudder, and then I hit the trim button, you can see it just saved all those crazy values and now my aircraft's gonna stay in this wild thing. And if I sit here and try to fix it, and if I try to sit here and fly my plane and get it, and I fight all these wonky trims that I've put in, I'm having to push forward on my stick and roll left and undo the rudder that I did. I'm trying to fix the rudder now. And if I sit here and I get all my controls kind of back normal and hold it and then hit the trim button again, I might go closer to the values that I wanted, and then I can let go of the stick. But you can see every time I push the button, there's a bit of a lurch. That's because, like, it's instantly translating my stick position to a relative trim position, which is then immediately forcing the aircraft to have like more momentum in whatever direction I was nudging it, because I'm still nudging it in that direction and I've got trim on top of it. So to trim in this way is much more difficult, and it's a much less methodical process. You can see it's very hard for me to like get precise numbers. Now I can get the aircraft stable, but the amount of time it took me to get here was way longer, and if I were to upset the attitude and do some violent maneuvering, pick up a bunch of speed, and then try to quickly find center again, it's gonna be, I'm just looking for it right about, trying to like, right about there-ish. It feels all right. Now, I could struggle with trying to find the exact balance with my stick, or I can sit here and just walk those values one at a time. So you see how much more smooth this is if I can click a button and bring it up or down by one notch at a time. And if I want a little bit more of a climb, I'm like, you know what? 1 meter a second, not quite enough. I want to climb just a little bit more than that. Boom, I just click that elevator trim up, and there, look at my VSI coming alive, climbing me just a little bit more. And if I'm like, oh, you know what, that side slip indicator, it's just slightly out of whack, I just didn't quite get that right, I can come in here and just click it into place methodically, smoothly, intelligently. And one of the major reasons that I just absolutely cannot stand that Gaijin has made this a default control is not only that it's a bad way to trim your aircraft in general, but the default binding for this is T, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize that it is also the default button for radio messages to the team. And what do sim players always telling you to do? Press T41, press T42. call cover me, do all this stuff. Every time people press T and try to open up that menu, it screws up your aircraft. So the best thing, in my opinion, is just to delete this trim aircraft and instead come in here and just purposefully open up each one of your control axes for the elevator, the aileron, and the rudder. And then what you want to do is just come in here and either bind it to an axis or put it into relative control step mode so that you see increase and decrease. If you're not in relative control step mode, you'll see maximum and minimum. But relative control mode, you'll see increase and decrease. If you do assign it to an axis, you don't want relative control. If you don't assign it to an axis and instead use buttons, you do want relative control. Buttons should be increase and decrease. Now, for elevator, it's backwards. I use down for increase elevator and up for decrease elevator, just inverted there, kind of for the same reason that the stick is inverted. Pressing up on the arrow keys is like pushing your joystick away from you, which would decrease the value of your trim and cause you to nose downwards. So I just inverted these two here just to make it work in my head. And then what I normally do is I have pressing them both together resets it back to 0. So if I ever get like super wonky trim and I want to like get quickly back to 0 without having to take my eyes off of what I'm doing, I just press up and down together and it goes right back. Now, we already talked about relative control, but the next thing is if you're going to use relative control, you want to get some relative control sensitivity. You don't want 100 and you don't want 10. You want somewhere in the middle. I like 30. Sometimes I use 40. I've used 40 in the past, but I'm usually 30 or 40. But this is basically like if you're at 100% and you press the button, it'll do the step like multiple times. Like it'll be like tick, 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 tick. And if you do it at like 10%, it'll be really slow and you might have to press the button a couple of times to get the 1%. 30 to 40% makes it to where it's like you're pretty much every click is 1% and every now and then it'll miss one. I think that's why I sometimes use 40. But the relative control step is how many percent do you want it to move every time a button click is registered in the sensitivity. So let's look at what it looks like at 100% sensitivity for elevator trim axis. I'll show you guys why that's not very good. So if I start pressing on my elevator trim, you see how it's like moving crazy fast? It's kind of hard for me to like, it's moving one at a time, but it's like kind of, if you hold it down, it's shooting around pretty quick. Makes it a little bit difficult to be precise with. And then, you know, if you come in here and you trim your elevator trim back down to 1% and like 40% right there in the sensitivity. Now when I come in here and I hit the button, I can move it quickly, but I can also move it quickly and precisely at the same time. And I can kind of get like, and if I want to go one at a time, I can very easily go one at a time by just clicking the button. But if I want to go up real fast or down real fast, I won't go. It takes me a lot longer to get to the crazy ranges. Like if you need negative 100% elevator trim, something is dramatically wrong with your aircraft. And that is why it's nice to have an elevator trim reset button by pressing up and down together so that you don't go into an uncontrolled descent there. Now that same exact thing gets applied to your aileron and your rudder. Except for aileron, I just use right control and right and right control and left. You adjust your rudder trim much more often than you adjust your aileron trim. Aileron trim is typically only adjusted due to battle damage. Once you have aileron trim set the first time, it's pretty much good unless your aircraft gets like half its wing torn off. Then you're probably going to have to revisit it. Rudder trim is something that's kind of changing all the time based on your speeds. That really affects like your rate of climb and your top speeds and everything like that. And of course your elevator trim is what's going to be dictating like how fast you're climbing and all that stuff. So I use rudder trim for the primary one as right and left because I adjust it so much more often and it's so much more important to have it done well. And then in order to get into the aileron, I use right and left as well. I just use the combo key of holding down right control. But you guys can use whatever button you want. Some people use hat switches on their joysticks. If you've got extra of those lying around, feel free to do that. But the important thing is just to make sure you get the relative control step correct. Again, you do not want it if you have an axis that you're using. You do want it if you have a button that you're using. If you're using a button, it should say increase and decrease. And then you make sure you hit these sensitivities, make sure you hit that relative control step. And then once you get it all set up so that you can adjust your aileron, your rudder, and your elevator, and you got your trimmer's fixation, then you can bring every aircraft that you want to fly trimmed up into a test flight and fly it around in a test flight. The nice thing about test flight now is it allows you to start in the air. The previous tutorial that I did for this, it always talked about how you had to like take off and stuff like that, but now you could just bring any aircraft and just start like on glide path or up way high in the air. I usually like to bring no bomb, and I usually like to bring around like 25-ish minutes of fuel, 22 minutes of fuel, something like a combat style of fuel, like after I've dropped my bomb and I'm climbing looking for enemies and I'm cruise climbing, like, and I've spent 5 or 6 minutes of my own fuel. What do I want to be trimmed for? And that's what I'm going to be doing, is patrolling around with like 25 minutes of gas and no bomb. And now that I can start in the air, I can just start trimming the plane right away. This plane is trimmed up, so I'm gonna reset it all and get all the trim back to 0, and we'll trim it just the same way we did that FW190. First, we're gonna get this roll under control. Get a little bit of aileron trim in there so I can let go of the stick. And then we're gonna bring the nose down just a scotch. We're gonna look at that side slip indicator right here and just dial in a bit of starboard rudder trim, a bit of port rudder trim there, 3% starboard, and get that aileron trim back under control now that we've dialed in some rudder. And now my plane is nice and stable, and I've been able to click all these keys nice and confidently and do it one click at a time. The plane feels good, it looks good, it's nice and fast, it's climbing for me, Alt and T, trimmer fixated, and we're done. So it's so much faster to get into the games and get up to speed and get them all calibrated to your liking. And now that I've saved it for this BF-109 E7, when I take this aircraft into battle, you will see that the position of my trims have been restored. So let's go and see if we can find a... hold on, we got to put it on the lineup. So we just did the BF-109 E7. Here we go. We'll just throw it right over there. Come in here and see if we can find an air sim. So this is going to be a real lobby, a 3.0 lobby. Here's Maginot Line. We'll join them. And I'll spawn my BF-109 E7. And watch what happens at the bottom of the screen when I join. You'll see the position of the trims have been restored. Watch this. Position has been restored. Aileron 3%, elevator -3%, rudder 3%. So now that I'm in an actual game, you can see it says no rudder trim control, no aileron trim control, and it's telling me, no, you can't do that. You can. You do have aileron trim. It's right there. It's just you have to do it before the game starts. So now that I've taken this BF-109 into a test flight and gotten it all rigged up the way that I like, now that I take it into a battle, it'll be calibrated just the same as I finished it up in that test flight mission, because everything was restored the moment I spawned in. And that's how trim works. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys.